Gonna teach y'all today, First and Second Kings. So if we can just start with a bit of a get to know you thing. Could I just get everybody's name and maybe just tell me something fun about yourself?
Okay, I'm not shy. My name's Sandra. I'm from Nottingham, and I'm just still buzzing from the last class we've had. It was really good.
Alright, awesome.
So looking forward to this one as well.
Okay, sweet. Well, it's nice to meet you, Sandra. Alright.
I'm Kiele from Sunderland. Yeah, it's nice and cold here.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm from Sunderland. We are playing a big fun, but the heating's just been sorted, so we'll soon warm up.
Hi, I'm Nate from Sunderland, and I've got a big boat because I'm stuck between two women.
Okay. Alright, awesome.
I'm Kelsey. I'm in the States, and it is cold here as well, so we're looking forward for spring.
Awesome. Okay. So I think I'm pretty sure I've met all of you aside from Sandra. So yeah, it's just good to get to know everybody. Okay, so we're just gonna talk on First and Second Kings today. I have the slides. I do apologize, they were a bit late, so you'll get the slides after the lesson. But we're just going to go through them. I'll ask you guys some questions, so I hope you're ready to talk and get involved, because I like to ask a lot of questions. So we will just go ahead and get started. So does anybody know anything about First and Second Kings already?
It was just a line of kings that were there because people were like, we want the king, we want the king. It wasn't really God's plan. He just said, yeah, whatever, to the people. But really, God had his own plan.
All right. And do we know who the main person of First Kings who we're going to be focusing on, and that is? All right. So in First and Second Kings, we're talking about the rise and the fall of the kings, but also of the kingdoms. And a little bit of summary. We're going to start with First Kings here. A bit of a summary of it. The person that we're going to be dealing with throughout the book of First Kings is the wisest man ever to live, and he's illustrated in the first half of the book of First Kings. So do we know who the wisest man ever to live is known to be?
Yeah, Solomon, isn't it?
Yes, good job. It is Solomon. All right, and so throughout Solomon's leadership, Israel rose to its highest peak under him. And it took a while to win those over because a lot of people had opposed Solomon before he became king, but eventually they were united under his leadership. It doesn't stay good the whole time though, so we're going to learn about, what went into that, and he caused a little bit of trouble over time. So next is, who is Solomon? Now Solomon is a king, and he loved three main W's. This is a good point to write down if you're taking notes or anything. Solomon loved three main W's. Does anybody have any idea of what those three W's would be? They're all just three different words that start with a W.
Wisdom?
Yes, that's one of them.
Wisdom?
Yep. I was about to say the third one starts with a W, but they all do. So the third one is going to be wealth. So the three main W's that Solomon loved was wealth, women, and wisdom. There's a little bit of a odd mix up there. And Solomon They don't know his exact age whenever he was king, but they say that he was perhaps around 20 years of age. And he reigned for 40 years. And then he was also the firstborn of David and Bathsheba. Right. And it's okay if, like I said, I'm just going to ask a lot of questions. If you don't know the answers, it's totally fine. That's what we're here for. So Solomon did have some great achievements. Now, Solomon was known because of his magnificent structure of something. Does anybody know what his magnificent structure of something was? Do you know what that something was? All right.
The temple.
The temple, yeah. Awesome. Yeah, so Solomon had a magnificent structure of the temple. And the ark was also placed in the temple at its dedication. Now Solomon, he offers a prayer of dedication and a prayer of commitment to remain loyal and faithful to God. Now we're going to see throughout 1 Kings how Solomon, he kind of goes from a high point to a low point. And so we're going to see areas as well that we're going to be able to learn from personally throughout Solomon's life, and then also some warnings that God gives us from what Solomon had done throughout his reign as king. So he starts with this though. He started with offering the prayer of dedication and commitment to remain loyal and faithful to God. And then the next one, like I said, I apologize that you don't have the slides, but you will in a bit, and I have an outline of the temple in that slide as well. And so you'll be able to kind of go about the temple and see, you'll be able to see what all the areas are. Alright, so we're just going to jump to the next part. How I said he said the prayer of commitment, dedication. So if I were to ask you guys, and I want an answer from everybody if that's okay, what does the word commitment mean to each of you? And we can start with Sandra, if that's okay.
Someone that's just totally faithful, loyal, I guess.
Yeah? Sure.
Say unwavering loyalty.
Yeah, that's good. Right. Then my Sunderland ladies, what does the word commitment mean to the both of you?
To keep the promise.
Okay.
Be faithful.
All right. And there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just what it personally is to you. There's no trick questions.
Because it's hard to see what committed is because you commit to something, isn't it?
To see something through once you've started.
Okay, yeah. That's definitely true. All right. So we will move on there then. So I just wanted to ask each of you what the word commitment was to you, so you could personally think about, well, what it would mean to you. The definition of commitment, though, we have that it is the state or quality of being dedicated to a cause, an activity, or basically anything that you're committing yourself to, you're saying that you're going to follow through with. Or it can also be known as an engagement or an obligation that restricts freedom of action. So with that, we're going to go into what Solomon's commitment was within his prayer and how he kind of took a U-turn, you could say, because he was going in one direction. He prayed the prayer of commitment, of dedication, but then we're going to see how he turned around and he kind of fell back on his prayer of commitment. So even though Solomon previously prayed this prayer of commitment throughout the book of 1 Kings, we can see that his love for God is going to eventually fade. And it begins now his love, it does eventually fade, but his love began with something else. So his love began with a love for God and a desire for, do people know what Solomon had a desire for? It's another W. It's the good W though. We said it's in those first 3 answers that I had y'all answer. It's one of those W's. Does anybody know what Solomon did have a desire for whenever he first began?
He wanted wisdom.
Yes, he wanted wisdom. Exactly. And God did grant Solomon wisdom. Do you all have a Bible in front of you or near you, or one you can pull up on a phone?
Yeah.
And I'm just going to ask whoever gets to it first if you want to just read it. So if we can read 1 Kings chapter 3 and verse 16.
First Kings chapter what?
Chapter 3 and verse 16.
Now 2 women who were harlots came to the king and stood before him. And 17?
Okay, just give me 1 second here.
Is it only 16?
Alright, I apologize. I think I have the wrong scripture there. I'm sorry, guys. Alright, so basically we're going to go to the scripture where Solomon receives his wisdom from God. Which, did everybody get that handout that I sent? Or that Sister Joanna sent?
Yeah, not all of them.
Okay.
We-
Alright.
Yeah, we got that.
Well, we haven't.
We haven't got ours yet because they haven't been printed off.
Okay. Well, it's okay. It's just a handout. We're not going to go over that word for word today, but it's just one kind of explaining your main highlights and points of 1st and 2nd Kings, so you can go through it over time and after this class and kind of retain information of some of the stuff that we go over. So in that you'll see where you'll see in 1 Kings in the first half where Solomon is going to gain his wisdom that he had asked God for. Now, in time, and this also goes into those 3 W's we talked at the beginning, his love for wisdom, it started to diminish, and his love for something else started to rise. Do we know what his love started to rise for instead of wisdom? What'd you say? I think you had the right answer.
Women?
Yeah. Yes. No, you were right. So, over time, yes, God had granted Solomon wisdom. He had answered his prayer, but then Solomon was like, I don't mind as much about wisdom, and his wisdom started to kind of diminish, and he started to have a rise in a love for women and for wealth over what he was meant to do. And so, in time, we're going to see that his love for women will turn his mind and his heart away from following after God. And this is where we can go into where Solomon falls within 1 Kings. So his love for women totally overrides his love for God because he's not in the right mindset at this time. And then we can also see another area where Solomon cared more about wealth as well and more about himself in a way, because does anybody know how long, and if you don't know the answer, it's okay, how long it took Solomon to build the temple? The one that he's known for at the start. It's less than 10 years. I'll say that much. Okay. So it took Solomon 7 years to build the temple, which was great. I mean, that's awesome. 7 years is a It's a long time. He put a lot of work, a lot of effort into that, and he was known for the temple. But then later on throughout time, we can see where wealth got a hold of him, and he kind of started to care more about himself than his love for God, because he started using more time for him than time for God. And it wasn't in a good way, per se. It was a way where he just started to care more for himself. So it took him 7 years to build the temple, but then later on we can see that it took him 13 years to build his home. So we can kind of see where Solomon's priorities begin to lie, because he almost doubled the time just building his own home instead of building what he was building for God. And Solomon, as he did dedicate the temple whenever it was built, but his heart was not sincere when he did that, and we can see that now that other things are starting to unfold. And if we continue in this, so people would visit the temple, they would visit Solomon, and they would visit him to hear his wisdom. But Solomon kind of let some of that get to his head, and this is where a lot of his love for women and different things started to come into play. So this is a very interesting question, and it almost sounds crazy when you hear the number, but does anybody have any idea, or if you even want to, if anybody wants to give me a guess on how many wives you think Solomon had? If we can just go through a guess and just tell me how many wives you think he had.
500.
Okay. Anyone else? You can all give me a number. There's no wrong answer here. I
know that it's really high. He said wives and concubines. They'll say in the hundreds as well.
Okay. Yeah.
100. Yeah.
Well, if it took them 7 years,
700.
times that 500, 700.
Okay. Okay. All right. So, yes, you were right on the dot on that last one. Solomon had 700 wives. So, yeah, he had 700 wives, and that just seems like a crazy, insane number. But we can see definitely where his love for women began to come into play because of this, and how he was using his wisdom, not in the ways that he was meant to, but he was rather using it for himself, for his own benefit. And along with 700 wives, he had 300 concubines. Now, another thing that Solomon did with his wives as well is that instead of allowing them to worship God, I mean, it was already wrong that he had 700 wives, but instead of allowing them to worship God or being truthful with what he knew, because he did know that God has given him wisdom, has granted him things that he has prayed for, he began to build idols for all of his wives to acknowledge and worship. And so we see here another point where instead of them worshiping God, Solomon took that time and effort and he built idols for them to acknowledge and to worship out instead of God. So do we think that God was disappointed or happy with what Solomon did at this point?
Very disappointed.
Yes. God had a lot of disappointment in Solomon. And so, God got upset. God gets upset. And so he got upset with Solomon, and in result, he does make sure that Solomon is going to have consequences for what he's been doing and the sins that he has been committed. All right, so I know we literally just went over this, but just to see what everybody has gotten so far, how did Solomon disappoint God, in your own words?
I know that he disappointed God in that he broke, I guess, several laws. But one of the laws was not to have slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And he had slaves build the temple as well.
Okay.
Help him to do the stuff. He was putting people in bondage, which was against the law.
Right, good. Very good. Does anybody else want to say? All right, that's all right. Okay. So yes, he definitely did disappoint God, and it was in more ways than one. Just like Sandra just said, whether it was with the slaves or with his wives, with the idols, there were many ways that Solomon put disappointment in God. And because overall, all of those choices he made gave him the major choice to turn away from God altogether. And it wasn't not only with disobedience, but with putting those idols before him. Now, the result of this, Solomon didn't have the best result, because whether we do right or wrong, we still have consequences in our choices, as Solomon did. So God raised up enemies for Solomon because of his idolatry and because of his disobedience. And we're not going to read through all of the scriptures just now, but we can see it in 1 Kings in chapter 11 in verses 14 through 40. If you guys want to write that down, or if you want to double check, that's where we see is 1 Kings chapter 11 verses 14 through 40, where God raised up enemies against Solomon. And then God also pronounced judgment on Solomon, and he pronounced judgment on his posterity. So God pronounced judgment on all of the descendants, all of those that were to come after Solomon. And if we follow throughout the book of 1 Kings, we can see where all of these other kings have a fall as well, because the idols and the strongholds have not yet been broken. And so we can see where those start to come into play as we continue on. So at this point, what can we learn from Solomon? Like, is there anything that stands out to you? And it doesn't have to be that we're learning something good from Solomon. It can be a lesson or a warning from Solomon. Is there anything that you feel yourself you can learn from Solomon thus far?
I think he was, God gave him wisdom, but it would seem that he lost that wisdom and became wise in his own eyes. He thought it was okay, I'll just do what I want to do. So he just ended up being empty, didn't it? Because he just made really bad choices, considering he's meant to be the wisest man.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Does anybody else have anything they want to add in?
There's more to life than what you see right now.
Okay. Yeah. That's good. All right. Yeah, so both of those answers are very good. So we can learn that as an example from Solomon, that, no matter how much wisdom we feel that God has granted us, we could always go south, or we could always do things in the moment, but we have to continue to ask ourselves, am I still in God's will, or am I putting things before Him? Am I using my own mindset? Am I using this for my own good? Or am I still using that for the glory of God? And so with that, we'll jump back to the consequences of what Solomon has done. And that's something else we can all take in as well, that, whenever we do disobey God, when we're letting that disobedience continuously happen in our life, we're not going to just get away with it. And we're going to go on to see how this affected all the descendants of Solomon. So sometimes we're not only affecting ourselves, but we're affecting others around us who didn't really have the choice to be affected or not. And we're going to see how that theme replayed until the captivity. So whatever good the kings tried to do, they still are going to fail throughout time, because the altars of the idolatry and everything that has been placed in Israel has not been destroyed yet. And that was from how Solomon started things off. So we're just going to go through some of the kings here. You can write them down if you feel to. There's quite a few, or like I said, you guys should have the slides later on. So kings to follow after Solomon is Jeroboam. He's going to become the next king. And he makes a critical mistake of idolatry. So we're going to see how Solomon's choices continue to affect the people that were to come after him. After that, we have King Nadab, and he reigns in his place. And I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing these names wrong because some of them are interesting. And he was assassinated just after 2 years. And then we go on to Baasha. And he did evil things within the sight of the Lord. And not only did he sin, he also caused Israel to sin under him while he was in the leadership. We have Elah, and the people conspired against him as he regularly would be drinking himself into drunkenness and letting that disobedience flow throughout his life as well. And then we have Zimri. Zimri burned the king's house down upon himself in anger, and he died. Then we also have Tibni and Omri. Now those two, they were kings during a split. But Tibni, he ended up dying, and in result that did make Omri the king. And Omri made Israel sin as well by provoking the Lord to idols. And then one of our last ones, we have Ahab. And we can see where Ahab's reign was taken in place in 1 Kings, and it's in chapter 16, verses 30 through 33. And Ahab was actually declared worse than any of these other kings. So it's kind of like things just continue to get worse and worse. And he was declared worse than any king before him. And so that's kind of your roundabout of 1 Kings, of the kings, of Solomon. How it did start off on a positive note, but we can see by the end of 1 Kings, we're looking quite negative. And that's because of all of the disobedience and the idolatry and things that came into play throughout the book. Now, and you'll see this on your slides as well. So throughout 1 Kings, we're just going to go over a little overview. And in chapters 1 through 11, and this is a good thing to take note on if you feel to. In chapters 1 through 11, your focus is going to be on the United Kingdoms, on the kingdoms being united. And then your two main topics are going to be Solomon and the kingdom and tranquility. The main place that chapters 1 through 11 take place are going to be Jerusalem, which is the capital of the United Kingdom at that point. And then our time span throughout those chapters is 40 years. And then the second half of 1 Kings is chapters 12 through 22, which that is going to focus more on where the kingdom had divided at that point. And as we just went over all of the kings, we can see there's many. So our topics on the second half are the many kings and also the kingdoms in turmoil. And our main place in that second half is Samaria, which is the capital of Israel. And then also Jerusalem again. At this point, it's the capital of Judah, and our time span is going to be over 90 years. So that is it for the start of 1 Kings. And now we're just going to jump over to 2 Kings. All right. Okay, so 2 Kings, a bit of a summary in this is that the book of 2 Kings is going to continue the narrative of 1 Kings, but it's going to begin about 80 years after the division of the kingdom, which this is going to begin to carrying parallel accounts of the two kingdoms for about 130 years. I know there's a lot of years and numbers going on here, but you'll have this to read over in your own time as well. So our 2 Kings summary as well, it's going to be focusing over the fall of the northern kingdom, preceding the history of the southern kingdom, and also the fall of the southern kingdom, which is going to take 120 more years. And this book will also cover the last 12 kings of the northern kingdom and the last 16 kings of the southern. And altogether, this period of 2 Kings, the period is going to be approximately 250 years. All right. So does anybody know who a main focus in the book of 2 Kings is? So we had our big main focus on Solomon within 1 Kings. Does anybody have an idea of who our main focus is going to be in 2 Kings? Not throughout the whole part, but throughout the first few chapters. It starts with an E.
Elijah.
Yes, Elijah. Good job. All right, so Elijah, we're going to be going through his part as well, and we don't have time to read through every chapter verse by verse, but that's why I sent that. There's a handout as well, and that will kind of have the overview of all of those chapters. Now, Elijah and his final acts, it's going to go over Elijah's ministry through chapters 1 through 8, and it will be around Elijah's acts, including him being transported to another location, and then also Elijah's ministry and numerous miracles that took place. And that's going to be within the first 8 chapters of 2 Kings. Now, if we go on to chapters 9 through 17, we're going to come across where there's a collapse of Israel and also a decline of the southern kingdom of Judah. So on the last one, we were focusing a lot on Israel, and then in 2 Kings, we're going to start to be introduced to Judah and how their kings came about, and if it was any better than Israel. Does anybody have any idea? Do you think that the king layout for Judah, do you feel that it's going to be the same as Israel or better than Israel?
In some ways better, but more or less the same pattern. There's a lot more positive kings, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Yeah.
Generally the same.
Yeah. No, you're exactly correct. That's very true. So we're going to see how they did differentiate, but there were still highs and lows in the southern kingdom of Judah as well. So we're going to go through various kings. We already went through our various kings of Israel, so we're going to go through the various kings of Judah and how Samaria is going to fall as well with Israel, and that's how we're going to go into this next part. So kings of Judah are going to be spoken of until the fall of Jerusalem, and that's going to be on our next few chapters. It's going to be the last chapters of the book. So chapters 18 through 25 is what covers the kings of Judah to the fall of Jerusalem at the end. So Hezekiah, he revives the worship of God in Judah, and the descendants of Hezekiah also are going to return to idolatry. So yes, just as you just said, it's true. There are going to be some high points, and we're going to run into better kings such as Hezekiah, but at the end of the day, they still all had free will, and so they're going to begin to fall back into that pattern of idolatry over time. All right, so in Judah, the situation is somewhat better, but it's definitely not ideal because they have few kings that lead in righteousness. But the difference that we're going to run into here is that, yes, they have few kings that lead in righteousness, but is few kings more than what we had in Israel? Alright, so the answer to that is yes. They only had a few kings that led in Israel, or that led in Judah in a righteous way, but how many kings led righteously in Israel? It's kind of a trick question.